Welcome to the Wealthy Life Podcast. I'm Sybil Verch, and today we're going to cover everything you need to know about separation and divorce. Not the type of situation most people want to be in, but understanding your rights and the process, if you are in that situation, can help provide a sense of stability and control in an otherwise chaotic time. Joining us today is expert Emma Neary, a family lawyer with Horn Coupar. Emma, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I'm going to ask you a question I like to ask all of my guests to kick things off.
Sure.
What does living a wealthy life mean to you?
I would say living a wealthy life means that when unexpected situations occur, you can manage. You're not in dire financial straits. You have the means to deal with it. As an example, we recently had a fire in our hot water heater. Unexpected for a tank that was only 6 years old. And there were some costs associated with it that we were not expecting at a time of year when there were lots of other expenses happening.
Yeah.
And, you know, was it something we planned for? No. Was it something that we were able to deal with without a ton of undue stress and wondering how we were going to be able to pay for it? Yes. So just being able to prepare for those rainy day situations.
The unexpected, planning for the unexpected.
That's exactly it. And knowing that you'll be okay if it does happen, or when, because let's be honest, the when does happen to all.
It does happen
at some point in our lives. Yes.
Yeah. Having a little extra aside. Thank you. That's great that you could share that with us today. You know, I look at marriages, 50% maybe end in divorce.
Somewhere around there, and long-term relationships as well.
Right.
Not just marriages. There are a lot of common law relationships where people are in long-term common law relationships.
So knowing that, are there things that people should know about the separation and divorce process before they even get married?
Yes, there are. I would say the most important thing is to talk about money before you get married.
Yes.
Talk about how you want to live your life, how much you want to save. Are you comfortable having debt? If you are going to have children, what's the plan? Does one parent want to stay home for the whole time, for a period of time in children's lives? I see, unfortunately, a lot of people going through a separation because they had different ideas about how their families were going to be structured after they had children. And it causes a lot of strain on relationships. And when you have young children and there are already a lot of stressors happening, it unfortunately can result in a separation. Also, both people having an understanding about finances is a really important piece.
Well, money is not only the number one cause of stress, but I think it's got to be one of the top causes of marriage breakdown. That and communication.
Yes. Communication is important, but for sure, financial stresses.
Yeah, if you have different ideas of, you know, one's a saver and one's a spender.
Yep.
I remember before my husband and I got married, we went and saw the minister who made us go through a compatibility test.
Yes.
And I would highly recommend that to anybody. Mm-hmm. And it asks all the questions that you're talking about. You know, how many kids do you want? What if one doesn't want any and the other person wants 5?
Yeah.
Well, that may not work.
Totally.
Who's supposed to do most of the household chores?
Yes.
Who's contributing to what?
Yep. Whose career, you know, if the kids need early pickup for a medical appointment, dentist activity, who's going to be doing it? Is one person's career kind of going to take a back seat to the other? Are you going to share those tasks equally? What is that going to look like? And having the conversation ahead of time can really help to resolve a lot of the, I would say, anger that can dwell in someone when they become the default parent, which I know is a big thing in social media these days. There's a lot of resentment.
Yeah, and it's just a misalignment of expectations.
Yes.
Generally speaking. Okay, so let's assume people are compatible. They've had all these conversations.
Yes.
They're going to move in together.
Yes.
They're going to get married, maybe. Mm-hmm. What about a prenup agreement or a cohabitation agreement? They're the same thing?
They are the same thing, just depending on whether or not they have plans to get married currently or just to live together. Most of the time, if we do cohabitation agreements, they are meant to endure even if you do get married.
Yeah.
The big thing there, again, is having the discussion about finances. What are each party bringing into the relationship? That's a really important question, especially if it's maybe a subsequent relationship, if you have children from previous relationships, because under the Family Law Act, everything that you bring into the relationship is what we call excluded property. So you get to keep that separate.
Okay.
But the growth of those assets that occurred during a relationship is family property.
Right.
And so having discussions about, okay, what does that look like? Documenting it, because the other thing that a lot of people don't realize is that bank records only go back 7 years. So let's say you're in a long-term relationship, you separate 15 years down the line, you know that you had X amount in savings, investments, whatever it is, or you owned a house, then you sold it, bought another house together, but you don't have any of the paperwork to show what those numbers were.
Right. Then you're hooped.
It's a big area of disagreement. So we have so many clients who are coming in to get a cohabitation or prenup agreement for the sole purpose of documenting what they had at the beginning of the relationship. Everyone is on the same page at that point. They're happy. And so there's an agreement about what's going to happen. Another really common time when people get cohabitation agreements or prenups is when family is either gifting or doing early inheritances for the purpose of buying a house. Given the market, that's a very common thing.
So how do you deal with that? And
So-
what's the right thing? What's the fair thing?
Well, the right thing and the fair thing honestly depend on every relationship and every couple. And there's a bunch of different ways that we can structure it. The most important thing is to document, okay, the amount of money and what's the intention at that point. You can always revisit the agreement later. You can change the agreement, come to a different arrangement down the line. But most of the time people want to say, okay, I'm getting $500,000. It's going into this house that we own together. The increase in value, how are you sharing the increase in value? Is it equally? Is it proportionately based on the amount of money that you've put in? What does that look like?
Right.
So that it's documented and there isn't a disagreement down the line where someone says, yeah, I remember that there was money from your parents, but no, wait, that was a gift to both of us.
Right.
Or yeah, it was to you, but you say it was 500,000. I think it was 50,000. And people's memory changes
and
over
without
time.
paperwork and words are cheap.
Totally, they are. And separation is expensive. And, you know, the reality is if you knew that there was a 50% chance that or 50%-ish chance that you were going to get into a car accident, you would ensure that you had more than sufficient coverage or any type of life event where the odds were that high.
Right.
So this is an insurance policy against the possibility of that happening.
And it's not a huge expense really in the scheme of things. And it can actually save a lot of headache and a lot of money down the road. And hopefully you never need it. But if nothing else, at least it's going to provide an avenue to even have that conversation to hopefully bring the couple even closer together. We talked about that compatibility assessment and talking about all these different things.
Yes.
Now it's just taking that conversation and kind of documenting it.
That's exactly what it is.
And then I'm a big believer, I don't want anyone to ever feel trapped in a bad situation, feel trapped in a bad relationship because they don't understand what their rights are. They don't understand how assets would be split or can they survive? Will they have enough income? And we're going to dive into that too. There's so much to talk about. But on this topic, I'm thinking about what happens to like a family cottage. Let's say a cottage is left, like I can think about this in my own situation. So my husband's family had a property that's been in the family since 1969.
Yes.
And we intentionally transitioned it into his name at some point. I didn't want my name on it because it was family property. And I just wanted to be respectful to that.
Yes.
But any of the growth in it is typically divisible if something were to ever happen to us. Hopefully we'll be together happily until we're 110 in our rocking chairs, smiling and, but in that case, what is the default without an agreement?
So without an agreement in that situation, first of all, ownership doesn't matter. So whether it's in your husband's name, joint names, it's about who has a legal or beneficial interest in property. And that is where there's a whole other argument about, properties that someone has a beneficial interest in, even though they might not be on title because they pay for it. And that's another area
which I contribute to. Like, so when I think about this example, I help, do the decorating and I do all the bookings because we rent it out.
You do
and
that.
I do all the tax reporting and we go use it together as a family property. So that's an example of it's in his name.
It's in his name, so it would be family property. But also, for instance, if there was a sibling who, even though your husband was the sole owner, but they went through a separation, but they contributed financially, they used it.
Okay.
There could be an argument there. But if it's just, this hypothetical, hopefully, between you and your husband, part of it is, okay, at what point did he actually become the owner of the property? And at that point, what was the value, the fair market value of the property? At that point in time, was there a mortgage or anything, any debt secured against it? Because we're looking at the equity. And then how much did it increase in value by over the course of your relationship? That increase in value or increase in equity, the standard is that it is divided equally. There are some situations in which it is not divided equally. The fact that it was brought into the relationship by one party or owned prior to the relationship is not a factor that the court generally considers when you're looking at an unequal division. So you'd be looking at all of that.
Right, which is interesting to note. And when he did buy the property from the family, it was our money that went into it. So like this example, I know the reality is it is jointly ours, but it is in his name.
Yes.
But if we wanted, like, let's say hypothetically, I said, I don't want anything to do with that when the time comes.
Yes.
In a cohabitation or a prenup agreement, can people give up their legal rights to things in advance?
They can in advance and they can after the fact as well. We also do post-nuptial agreements. So for people who are already married and where they are documenting an agreement such as that you would agree you have no right to the cabin, even if there was joint money that was put into it, or a scheme where the joint money you get back, but the growth is his, whatever that might be. But people can do it at any point. The Family Law Act in BC, because every province has its own statutory scheme for division of property, but all of the provinces have their own legislation that allows for it. You can do these agreements at any point. The really key factors are that both parties either have received or have had the right to receive independent legal advice, that there's a full disclosure of all income, assets, and liabilities that are a part of the agreement, because sometimes we're just doing an agreement, say, about a cottage, right? And that there's no emotional vulnerability or any other type of duress. And the traditional arrangement that is generally referenced there is, okay, you're about to get married and your husband on your wedding day presents you with this agreement. It says you have to sign or we're not getting married, which doesn't generally happen.
That'd be horrible.
But there are other situations where duress could be an issue. And so what we say to people when they're coming in is, I don't want there to be a tight time frame on this, right? If most of the time, if people either are coming in at the commencement of their relationship before they hit spousal status, because either they're not married or they haven't been in a marriage-like relationship for 2 years, or when they're way past that window. And so the most important thing is making sure we're not rushed, so we're not opening that duress door, and making sure that people have time, if they want to consult with a lawyer, that they can consult with a lawyer.
So when do people most often do this after the fact? Like what are the situations that would arise that would prompt someone, gee, we've been married for 10 years or 15 years. We never did a prenup. Now we want one?
Generally inheritances. Okay. That is the big time when after the fact people are coming to see us, because one spouse is receiving an inheritance and they want to they've come to an agreement about what they're going to do with the money and they want to document it. That is the most common circumstance after the fact. Or there's a financial gift, again, from family, which really we would see more as an advance on inheritance. Yeah.
Wow. And it's nice for people to know that it's never too late.
It isn't. No.
Like anytime your situation changes, or if you've got a sudden windfall, an inheritance of any sort, whatever you decide you want done with that, have that conversation and get it documented.
Yes. And that's the most important thing, is have the conversation. The number of people who don't have the conversation. And, I spend a lot of time going around talking to different financial advisors and educating them as well, so that when their clients come to them and say, you know, they're going to make a withdrawal from their investments because they're going to gift to their children or whatever that circumstance is, the financial advisors can then have the discussion, okay, is this going to be documented? How is it going to be documented? Because it just saves so much headache, time, money, stress down the line, because that going through a separation is incredibly stressful. And so if we can do anything to alleviate that stress, and I say this to everyone who I do a cohabitation or prenup with at the end, you know, when we sign it, I always say, you know, it's been a pleasure working with you and I hope I don't have to see you again. And I genuinely mean that, but sometimes I do. And let me tell you, when we come, if there is a separation and we come back, it is much smoother sailing than it could potentially be otherwise. Obviously, there are separations that are very amicable as well, but then it's just providing some certainty.
So are there other things people can do before they actually separate or file for divorce? And we're going to jump into what that process is like. But before they even get there, the relationship's rocky, they're not getting along. Is there any hope? How do you know if there's hope?
I say to everyone who comes in for an initial consultation, I always ask, have you gone to couples counseling? Because is there anything that can be done? In my shoes as a lawyer, I probably can't fix it, but a really great counselor can, potentially, depending on the situation. The other thing is make an appointment with a lawyer. Do not rely on ChatGPT. It is wrong. The information online, depending on, often it will refer to information from other jurisdictions. Go see a lawyer, even if it's just for a 1-hour consult. Get information that is specific to your circumstances. I see a lot of people who are considering separation and they want to know, what does that look like? What would it look like if we separate? Because knowledge is power. And so if it happens to you and you're not flying completely blind because you have some information about what it might look like, again, it empowers you.
Yeah, I think it takes a lot of the worry or the unknown away, so you know where you would stand. And then you can focus on the things that are important. And hopefully, you know, in many situations, you can reignite that spark. You know, you can, and there's like a common age, I think, or common stages in life that marriages tend to struggle. From your perspective, when do you see that?
I would say the two most common, I guess, situations would be the first when kids are young, right? And that generally, like I said earlier, if the discussions haven't been had about what the roles are going to be, and there's already tension about that, and you're sleep deprived and you're in the trenches with young kids. Anyone who's been there knows that it is so, it's busy, it's stressful. There's just a lot of moving parts. And so you add in to that, you know, some type of underlying issue in your relationship, it's magnified. So that would be a common time. Another common time would be after the kids leave the house and, you know, you're spending a lot of time together. Maybe you're different people than you were at the beginning of your relationship. And all of a sudden the kids aren't there to occupy your attention. That, unfortunately, I do see as another common time.
Well, in my case, I feel like we're dating all over again.
And that's great.
It's fun.
And that's great. You have all this free time, right? And so that's fantastic. And
like,
that does happen for a lot of people too.
Yes.
Oh my goodness, we can talk and we're not being interrupted. We can go places.
We can go on dates and we can,
And for me, I have young kids. Oh, I don't have to be home by 8:30 for the babysitter.
I know, it can be really good. Okay, so let's talk about the process of separation and divorce. Because you don't just, that's it, I want a divorce, we're getting divorced tomorrow.
No.
What's the process?
So divorce is the legal act of ending your marriage. And that is the last thing that happens when you separate. You are separated from the moment that one of the spouses communicates to the other that the relationship is over. And so you can live together in the same house for a period of time when you're separated. I will say here that family law and CRA do not always communicate on that point. And sometimes there are issues with child tax benefits, even though you're separated, but you're living in the same house. But from a legal standpoint, from family law, you are separated.
Okay.
And the date of separation for divorce is important because it starts the 1-year clock. The court will not grant you a divorce in most circumstances, absent adultery or mental cruelty. And I will just say no one really gets divorced on those grounds. You have to, the person who committed that behavior has to swear an affidavit. It doesn't happen. So you're waiting out, even if those situations might apply, you're waiting out the 1 year clock. And so after the 1 year, you can apply to the court for a divorce. In that year, most of the time, people are starting to pay, decide someone's moving out, they're living in different households, how the finances are going to be structured, and arranging their affairs. And it's restructuring their family is the terminology that I like to use, because that really is what's happening, especially if you have children. You're not just going your separate ways and never seeing each other again. And the goal in most circumstances is that even though people are separated, you want to be able to sit beside each other at your kid's graduation, at your kid's wedding. You don't want your child or children to be stressed out about, oh my gosh, mom and dad have to be together, and detracting from a special event or a special day. So one of the things that I say to everyone is, I'm a certified collaborative lawyer. Go explore that process. It is a commitment by both parties. You sign an agreement with your lawyers that you are going to stay outside of court. You hire professionals jointly who might need to assist in terms of appraisers, financial specialists, child specialists, coaches, to really help you restructure the family. And everyone, you do joint meetings, everyone gets the same information at the same time, so one party doesn't feel like they're light years ahead of the other. And it is just a much more civil way of going about things. And it's much cheaper than litigation. Look, I'll be honest, going to see a lawyer, it's expensive, right? And depending on your situation, I see some people and they've come to agreements on everything, and I'm helping them to properly document it in a separation agreement. Again, the number of people who come in with a ChatGPT agreement, and ChatGPT has included clauses that are legally unenforceable. But it's a starting point. And I use that as a starting point. The same way if someone comes in and says, okay, here's what we've agreed to. Can we talk about it? And I go through and no, that sounds fine. Maybe this is a little offside. Let's talk about it. Let's get some more information. And at the end of the day, we can do up an agreement, and the other side can decide to get a lawyer to review it or not, and it can be signed off on. So a lot of times we do that. And that's if everyone has worked things out and there has been full disclosure and they know what's going on. Other times, we're looking at what is the best process. Collaborative law is a great fit for a lot of families. Sometimes people don't want to commit to that formal process. We do mediation, right? There's a lot of negotiation between lawyers, or between, if one person has a lawyer and the other person is self-represented, having discussions. The big thing that I say to everyone, though, is get your disclosure together. You need to get disclosure of last 3 years of income tax returns, notices of assessment, if there's corporations, all of the corporate stuff, all of your investments, any asset, any debt that you have.
How about hidden assets, and how do you know? Like, what if one has like a secret bank account?
So generally, that's where you start asking for statements, going back, start with 2 years, right? That account has been funded somewhere. Right? So as long as you can see the paper trail, right? The money goes in, income goes into whatever account it goes in, whether people have their finances structured with joint accounts or accounts in their sole names. And then when there's that concern, it's kind of a forensic accounting that often clients undertake themselves because it's much cheaper. You can hire someone to do that for you. But generally, your lifestyle, you can go through and know the big transactions that were happening at certain periods of time, and look to see, is there money going out that we can't trace? And when people buy assets like cryptocurrency, that is often where we see it, because you see the money going into some type of crypto exchange.
And then you don't see it after that.
Then you don't see it after that.
It's like, what is still there? Where is it? It's very hidden.
It is. And it is a concern for a lot of people about hidden assets. I will say that there are pretty stringent disclosure requirements in terms of if people need more information in order to fully understand, or they have a concern about this. If you do end up in court, the court is going to order that disclosure. So it is, in this day and age, it's pretty hard to really hide it unless it's something that someone has had long ago and they haven't put any money into it at all.
Yeah, and I'm thinking even about investment accounts are really hard to hide.
Yes.
Or savings accounts, because any interest, dividends, capital gains generated produces tax slips.
Yeah.
And you can just go to the accountant, or you can go onto your CRA site, and all of those are sent to the CRA.
That's right. They're all there. And that's part of the reason why you get the income tax returns. In addition to figuring out income for support, you look for that type of stuff. You look at all the sources of income, which is why it's important to not just get the summary, the CRA summary. You want to actually see the return. You want to see the individual boxes for what were the different sources of income. So then you can look, okay, there's dividend income, there's capital gains. Oh, where is that from? I don't have an account.
Right.
I haven't seen
the red flag.
Yes.
So assets then, if I hear you right, are generally split evenly based on the value that each party brought into the relationship. They would get themselves, and then just the growth or the building of stuff together gets split?
Yeah. So the way that I always describe it to everyone is, there's a pool, okay? Yeah. Everything goes into this pool or this pot. Everything in either one of your names, joint names, it goes in. Before the pot gets divided, you take out the exclusions, which are value of assets that either one of you had at the beginning of the relationship. Okay. Inheritances that went into the pot, gifts from family members. There are some other circumstances, insurance proceeds, for damages. Like, there are some other things that go into the pot.
So you figure out what can be excluded and you separate those out.
And then you separate those out, and then what's left is generally divided equally. Again, there are some circumstances where it's not, but the unequal division is definitely the exception, not the norm.
And is there, I mean, it sounds like there's some gray areas in there. So this is where the negotiation comes in, or the discussions, like an inheritance, for example. Was that an inheritance just for the one, or was it an inheritance for both? Or
the inheritance is usually easier to track because there's the will. It's the gifts.
Perfect.
The gifts are the one, and especially the other thing that a lot of people don't realize is if parents, it's usually parents, are giving a financial gift in order for a couple to buy a house, and the house is going to be held in joint names, the bank will usually require that there's a gift letter saying it's to both of them.
Okay.
And that is just because they're going on title together.
Right.
So having an agreement to confirm, even though the bank requires this, there's an agreement that it's still excluded, is very important, because I can tell you most of the time when that separation arises, everyone's, the other spouse is holding up that gift letter to say my name's on it. So it was a gift to both of us.
Okay. So then you've got this pool left over, the exclusions are removed.
Yep.
They're split.
Yes.
Let's talk now about income. Alimony, spousal support. I don't even know what the right term is.
Spousal support is the term in Canada.
Okay. Yeah. Is alimony an American thing?
It is,
okay. Spousal support, pro-Canadian. How does that work? Who's entitled to it? For how long?
So this could be an entire episode in of itself, but generally speaking, the way that it works is, first of all, you have to determine what someone's income is, which, if you're a T4 employee, generally pretty straightforward, unless there's a bonus structure that varies, right? When you have someone who's self-employed, it can be more difficult, especially if they're corporations. You look at what someone might be leaving in their corporation.
Because they may only be pulling out a small amount of income, but the corporation's earning a ton of income.
Exactly. So then you have to start looking at the corporation's pre-tax income. You have to start looking at expenses, and if there's a personal use component, because there are different rules for CRA than there are for family law. And I say this to clients all the time. This is a valid deduction for CRA. You don't need to report that. But when we're looking at it through the family law lens, some of these expenses are added back in their entirety, or 50%. Things like vehicle use, home office, depending on if there might be two ways you're kind of double dipping. Meals and entertainment, capital cost allowance. Those are really big ones that are almost always in some way added back.
Because they can make the income look smaller than it really is.
Yes.
It's just a way of reporting it for a tax strategy, really.
Totally, right? And there are people who, again, CRA doesn't take issue with it. They go on a vacation and they're vacationing to Hawaii because there's a conference there, but they decide to stay an extra 7 days with their family, and they're able to write it off or a portion of it off for CRA. But when you're looking at the amount of available income for support, that would get added back. Or again, your vehicle. You know, realtors are a perfect example of that. They often have one vehicle and they do drive their vehicle around for work all the time, right? But they're also using it to drive their kids to soccer and hockey and go grocery shopping. And so there's a personal use component to it. If you have if you're a plumber and you have your work van and you literally only use it for jobs, that's different, right?
Right.
We're probably not looking at adding it back. No, is there a personal use component to that asset that you are deducting expenses for? And so it is fact specific. It depends. Sometimes there is a separate vehicle, in which case, okay, if you're only deducting for the one, that's valid. Cell phones, going out for dinners, where there's a write-off there, you're still eating, you're still feeding yourself at that dinner, even though you might be entertaining clients. So looking at those type of expenses, advertising, there are lots of, again, you have to look at the financial statement and the expenses. The other thing is, where have expenses maybe changed when you look at pre-separation spending and expenses versus post-separation? Because sometimes people start getting a lot more aggressive in the write-offs.
Right. Thinking it's going to help them pay less in spousal support.
Yes. And child support potentially too.
And child support, which we're going to get to that in a minute as well. Is it safe to say that if both members of the relationship, if both parties are earning about the same amount of income, then no spousal would apply?
It depends. So it very much depends.
Okay.
And that depends on, the big thing is, do you have kids? What's the parenting arrangement?
Okay, let's assume no kids.
Yeah.
Or they're all grown up and they're independent.
Then, so it depends again. And let me tell you why. So
please.
In order to be entitled to, you have to show that you're entitled to spousal support.
Yeah.
And you can be entitled in two ways. One is compensatory support. And so a spouse is being compensated for roles and decisions that occur during the relationship.
Okay.
And the other is non-compensatory support. And that usually is based on income differential. And so when you're looking at compensatory claims, even though spouses might be earning the same amount now, historically, what were they earning during the relationship? What does the division of assets look like as well?
Right.
Because if someone has a really big exclusion claim, sometimes that might give rise under compensatory support. Now, again, very fact specific. Oftentimes, there would be no spousal support that was paid. If they did have kids, though, and one of the parents was caring for the kids the majority of the time, and it wasn't a shared parenting arrangement, there could be potentially, because when there are children, you always have to look at what is the parenting arrangement, and then what's the amount of child support that's getting paid, because child support, there's no tax on child support. It's tax-free money that's paid from the payor to the recipient. But on monthly spousal support, it's taxable income, which means it is tax deductible to the payor by the payee and taxable income to the recipient.
Right.
Okay. So the spousal support advisory guidelines, which are guidelines, but most courts in BC, they have been adopted. And so that's the starting point. You have to look at what the spousal support advisory guidelines say. And essentially, there's programs where you plug in all of the information and it gives you a range, and it looks at equalizing out the net disposable income after taking into account the various tax brackets, the non-taxable child support that's going to be paid. When you look at, Section 7 expenses that have to be paid, are we doing hockey? Are we doing swimming, dance, horseback riding, private school, tutoring, all these things?
Oh my gosh, and what if they don't agree on everything? That's a whole other thing.
That's a whole other thing. But so then you start looking at what's the net disposable income, and the spousal support advisory guidelines will give us a range, a low, mid, and high end.
Yeah.
And so that's the starting point, and you look at that and what is fair. If people are sharing children, if they do have children and they're sharing parenting equally, well, then it makes sense for there to be an equal amount of net disposable income. Similarly, if it's a long-term relationship and the children are grown, it still makes sense for them to both have the same amount of money.
And being married or living common law or in I don't even know if they use the term common law anymore, but it doesn't matter, right?
The same rules apply as long as so the only difference is if you are not married and you have not been living in a marriage-like relationship for more than 2 years and you do not have children, in BC, you're not entitled to make a claim. Most people, one of those two situations apply. Right. And so then you look at, okay, again, if you've got 4 children, and one person is the primary caregiver to those children, they're going to need more net disposable income because they're going to need to have a bigger house. They're going to have more expenses associated with the full or, majority care of the children.
Based on the tax implications that you just described a moment ago, it would be more advantageous for the primary caregiver of the children to receive extra child support as opposed to spousal support?
Yes, but child support is based on the federal child support guidelines, and it's kind of a standard. There's not really a whole lot of black and white there. It's a table amount. You plug in incomes. Once you've figured out what someone's income is, that is generally the income that is paid.
So it's set. So then you've got to work on the
spousal support.
How about, what are the differences based on the amount of time you've been together and the age when you separate?
Yes.
So if you're like a 25-year-old that was married for 5 years and then you split, I assume that's going to be different than if you had been with someone for 30 years and then separated and you're 60 years of age.
Totally. And kids are always a big factor, right? Because if you've been in a relationship for 5 years, but someone's a stay-at-home parent or they work part-time, there's going to be a longer obligation because you're also looking at caring for the children until they can be self-sufficient or they're no longer minors, and looking at that. And, in this day and age, a lot of kids are staying at home to go to university because that's the way that it is financially feasible. So it doesn't just end when children reach the age of majority. So you're looking at that when you have someone who they've been together for 30 years and they separate, their children are grown. Even though you might have entitlement because your relationship is longer, the length of the relationship definitely plays a factor. If someone's going to retire in 2 years, that's also a factor, right? And when I say they're going to retire, I don't mean, I've decided I'm going to retire at 58 just because we've separated.
Right.
But when you are reaching retirement age, which generally 65, it's acceptable for someone to retire. And so then you start looking at, maybe what's the income situation until retirement? And then what's the income situation after retirement? It depends on a lot of different circumstances. It depends on if there's a pension and the pension's already been divided and you're both getting that. Right. It depends on, again, exclusions, and if people have income producing investments that they're retaining, but that income is then going to play into their retirement income often in that scenario.
So is the basic premise of this trying to come up with a situation that doesn't disadvantage one or the other, and it's basically trying to equalize not only the assets, but the income for a period of time?
Yeah, it's looking at addressing the roles that both spouses play during the relationship and compensating one spouse, especially if their career in some way was affected. Whether, again, you had kids and someone took time off, whether one spouse was in the military and the other spouse followed them around for all the different postings. Right. And so they weren't able to really gain that seniority and footing in their profession, right? There are a number of different situations that it can apply to. And so you have to look at, what was everyone doing during the relationship? Did you take time off to have kids? How much time? Did you go back to work full time? Right. Sometimes people take time off and they go back and there isn't really any impact in their career. And that we look at differently versus someone who gave up advancements because they were prioritizing their spouse's career and they were the ones who were responsible for a lot more of the household tasks. And so again, that's where spousal support is the area where there's the most gray.
Yeah, and it sounds like it.
It really is. And the other piece about spousal support is you can also pay spousal support as a lump sum, okay? And so lump sum spousal support is non-taxable. So again, there are formulas to look at, how do we calculate that?
So it's like calculating the present value of an income stream.
Yes.
So instead of getting that income, if you got a lump sum instead, and that would generate the income stream you needed.
Yes. And that is often how, if someone is keeping the family residence and they would have to make a big payment to their spouse to keep it, well, we look at offsetting that with a lump sum payment of spousal support potentially. And we look at options, right? Because part of my job, a big part of my job, is to present my client with options. Their job is to make the decision, but my job is to say, there's a number of different ways that this could play out. Let's talk about them. What makes sense for you? I often have them go see financial advisors to get, or accountants to get some of that advice as well and look at, because even though they might want to keep the house, does that actually make sense long-term for him? Is that advisable for them to make that decision?
And if they were getting a lump sum, does that reduce some of the risk of their income stream? And the example I'm thinking of, you talked earlier about business owners or like commission employees, like real estate agents. If you're separated and you're receiving spousal support from someone whose income is variable, how does that come into play? Is it a set dollar amount that they have to pay no matter what? If their income goes up, do you get more? If their income goes down, does it go down? How does that work?
Yeah, so lump sum is somewhat of a gamble in that respect, because that is the number. That is the number. It doesn't matter if the payer's income goes up or it goes down. That's the number. So it provides certainty, which some people really like. The payer usually likes that certainty because then they can try and compensate in other ways if they can. But anytime you have someone who's concerned about volatility in their spouse's, job market, whatever that is, it's a comfort to know, okay, I have what I have. Maybe I could have gotten more if I went, if we did it on a monthly basis.
Okay, but that's the safe bet.
It could be the safe bet.
Yeah.
Sometimes people feel it's not the safe bet because they just, they want to exchange disclosure. And that's the other thing. When you do monthly support, you can agree to, we are paying X amount of dollars and it's for this period of time and there's no review. You can also do exchanges of disclosure and update that based on, especially when you've got fluctuating incomes. But there's a mental toll that goes along with reviewing that. And so I would say 90% of my clients, probably 95%, when I ask them what their goals are, finality and certainty are almost always listed.
Yeah.
So you don't want to be going and reviewing this every few years. You want to just know, this is the deal that we've come to. It works, and we're going to move on with our lives.
You want to move on and just keep it clean.
Yes.
Okay. Couple more quick things. Before we wrap up. Child support and custody. We talked a little bit about child support already. Custody. How do you sort out who gets the kids, and what are some of the things that get in the way of those decisions?
For sure. So the Divorce Act has changed. We don't use the word term custody anymore.
Okay.
A lot of people still use it, but that's fine. So parenting time, parental responsibilities are the terms that we use. So parenting time, parental responsibilities, the children's best interests guide all of that. Those are always at the forefront. Now, of course, determining what that is can be difficult, right? Ages, stages, development, that also plays into it. An arrangement that is suitable for a 2-year-old is not going to be the same arrangement that's suitable for a 12-year-old.
Right.
Where people are living, that's the other thing, right? Even though both parents might want to have the children 50% of the time, if the kids go to school in one area and a parent lives an hour away, well, it's not always best for the children to be in the car for that long 50% of the time. So knowing, again, where the kids are going to school so people can make arrangements around that is really important, right? And also that involves lifestyle changes, especially if you have been the parent who has been the primary breadwinner, right? And all of a sudden you need to get off of work to get there before after school care closes, and what that looks like, getting them to, kids' activities are not really built around both parents working full time.
No,
they are not. So making those sacrifices and accepting for the parent who maybe has been the one to take the kids to all of that the other parent does want to do it and is stepping up, that can be a really difficult adjustment. And so that's where a lot of my clients end up doing work with parenting or divorce coaches to help them kind of overcome those hurdles. And those professionals are counselors who work with them to help them accept the new reality and keep them focused on child's best interest, what is best for the children, and talking about the issues that arise, because problems arise. It's how you work through them, right? Again, you're restructuring your family. What is that going to look at? But children's best interests guide everything. There is a small amount of people who do end up in court. It is not the place that you want to be.
No.
The one thing that I think surprises most people the most about being in court is that, and every province is different, but in BC, we do not have what's called a unified family court, which means the judges who hear family law cases are also hearing criminal matters and civil matters. And they are not, for the majority of the time, they did not practice in family law. They came from a variety of different backgrounds.
It seems ridiculous.
That's our system. Yes, but
so try to stay out of court.
Try and stay out of court, right? You want someone, again, this is a big plug if you're going through a separation. Collaborative law, mediation. If you really can't come to an agreement, go to arbitration with an arbitrator who is practiced family law, knows family law. And so they understand the things that are important and that the guiding principles, so that you're not paying your lawyer to educate the person who's going to make a decision about your family. That's an incredibly frustrating position for families to be in. And look, court is not only expensive, but there's never really enough time for you to really have your full case heard.
And I like the idea that there's help around, like you've touched on this a few times about the counselors and other resources available, coaches to help you go through that. In the best case scenario, the kids should feel loved by both parents and shouldn't be caught in the middle. And we see that sometimes. I mean, we're all human and it just happens, I guess. But if each party can at least commit to minimizing that or avoiding that, it'll have a much happier outcome.
For sure. And the other thing too is, and I say this to everyone, you may think that your kid is okay, but most people have some type of benefits, right? Kids counseling benefits are very underutilized. Have them go speak to someone, because they may really benefit from talking to someone who doesn't have a vested interest in it. Family members who they're close to, even if they really are neutral, they are going to appear to be aligned with one parent over the other. They may be feeling uncomfortable but don't want to talk to mom about it, even if they've got a great relationship, or dad if they are super close to dad, because they're involved. So, you know, prioritizing that, making sure that your kids have someone to speak to if they need it. And look, a lot of teenagers, they don't want to talk to anyone anyway.
No. And they know everything, so
and
don't
they
worry
do,
about
of course. They don't need any help. But
it's hard on
they
them.
very much do. There was one thing you and I had talked about before the show, and I just wanted to circle back on with regards to support. And that is, a lot of people forget to look at insurance for support. Life insurance to secure support obligations, child support, spousal support, so important.
It is, because if if the person paying the support is unable to work, disabled, or in a coma, or dead, insurance can solve that problem.
100%. And ensuring in a separation agreement that the recipient spouse is named as the irrevocable beneficiary is so important. And I also have a lot of clients who choose to pay for the premiums on the policy
to make sure it doesn't lapse.
Correct. And because, you know, maybe the policy coverage is only at 500,000 and they want it to be $1 million. Well, they'll pay the premiums in order to make sure that there's sufficient coverage in place, because, you know, otherwise, you're making a claim against the estate. Maybe there's not a whole lot in the estate because everything has already been paid out by way of beneficiary designations. And then it's a difficult place to be, and you're trying to play catch up. And
I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's really, really good advice for people to do an insurance review at that point in time.
Totally. And to think about it and do it before you sign your separation agreement. That is the time to do it, because you want there to be a clause in your separation agreement about insurance and what everyone's obligation is to maintain the insurance until what point in time. You can have discussions about, you know, if your kids are 5 when you separate, does the amount of insurance decrease when they're 15, right? What does that look like? Maybe it doesn't because they're going to post-secondary, but
have the conversation.
Have the conversation and do it. It should be part of the agreement. The other thing is, don't think, oh, I can add it later. Sometimes you can if everyone's in agreement, but before everything is signed, like that is the time to make sure everything that needs to be included is included in that agreement, because often the other party is not willing to renegotiate afterwards.
No, you're not going to go back and do it after. I want to go back because a question that I should have asked you earlier was in the process of separation before the divorce is finalized.
Yes.
And how do people successfully manage their finances in that limbo period?
Yes.
How do you keep it fair? What advice do you have for people?
So that's again, go see a lawyer because it depends on what you're doing, right? If people are still living in the same house, it makes sense to just keep it as it is. If you get along on how you're spending, and who's paying for what. That's the thing. If you're both living in the house, obviously you need to keep paying the mortgage and all of the household expenses, all the kid expenses. Those all the standard stuff still needs to be paid. Where it can get tricky is when someone moves out. And so are you separating finances at that point and formal support is being paid, or are you still paying for everything out of the same pot? The big thing I will say is just you shouldn't ever be making unilateral decisions, right? That is where tensions escalate, problems arise. You may hate your spouse because of the circumstances under which you separated, but don't make unilateral decisions about, okay, I'm moving out and also I've redirected my pay. It's not going into our joint account anymore. I'm unilaterally deciding that this is how much I will pay.
You need to talk about it. Agree to whatever those terms are. And if you're not talking to each other, a mediator.
Get a mediator, get a lawyer involved. The other thing too is you can always say, I will agree to this on an interim, what's called without prejudice basis, meaning I'm agreeing to it before we all get the information that we need because we have to agree to something. I'm not setting the precedent because people are so afraid that if I pay this now, that's what I'm going to be stuck paying.
And what if someone spends a bunch of money?
Oh, yes.
And then if you're separated and one person goes out and buys a new car or goes on an extravagant vacation or whatever the case may be, how is that factored in?
So again, it depends on what they've done, right? Because if it's traceable to another asset, that's easier. But if you go on a big vacation, well, you have to look at it from both sides, right?
Yeah.
We often count that as what's called an interim advance. So
that makes sense.
Yeah. So it's money that was kind of like, it was pre-allocation and you got to do what you want with it. So when we're looking at the overall division of assets, there's compensation for that there. Cars, it also depends. Did you buy a new car? And then are we talking about a depreciation the second it drove off the lot? But you have those discussions, right? You do, because neither spouse wants to be paying for the other one to go on vacation, especially if they're going on that vacation with a new partner, right? But if you take the kids, maybe people are okay with it if you're both doing it. Again, having communication. And the big thing too is set the tone early, right? My biggest piece of advice is don't go to a lawyer who's going to start off by filing in court. There are very few circumstances in which filing is the first thing that you should be doing. You really should be trying to resolve things amicably through a friendly letter saying, hey, I've been retained. We'd like to go to mediation. We'd like to do collaborative law. Do you have a lawyer? If so, have them give me a call, right?
That's
tone is so important to how things go. It's really hard to bring things back off the ceiling when someone has filed in court.
And it's cheaper.
Way cheaper, much cheaper. Yes.
Yeah. So where can people go to get more information? Like this has been gold, I think, for most people. We've covered a lot of ground. Where can they go?
So my number one recommendation, because I know your viewers are everywhere, is to Google collaborative lawyers in your area. There's going to be a local collaborative group of certified collaborative lawyers. Start there, make some appointments. Often, if you go to one lawyer and it's not the right fit, that's fine. The same with when you're choosing a financial advisor or a counselor. you're not the right fit with everyone.
Yeah.
Make an appointment, get some information. I always suggest you start with a certified collaborative lawyer because they are going to be looking at it from they're going to try to take it out of the adversarial process and keep things outside of court, keep things as amicable as they can, even if you don't do the official collaborative process, right? Start getting your information, start there. I think there are so many family lawyers who think that is the best way and that everyone should be a certified collaborative lawyer for that reason, so that you know what that process is. And you look at it from that lens of, we don't just need to go to court. Court should be the last option.
resort.
And it's honestly for less than, I would say 5%, probably less than 3% of people really actually should be in court. And those are very extreme circumstances.
I think you have just enlightened people and have shared there is another way. It doesn't always mean court is in fact, very small percentage go to court.
Yes.
Collaborative, it's a beautiful thing.
Collaborative, go to mediation, negotiate, don't go to court. You will spend all of your money there. You don't want to do it. No.
Emma, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. It's great to be here. Thanks.
And thank you to our audience. We love having you with us. Thank you for your likes, your follows, your tweets, your comments, all of that. And what would you like to hear next? Let us know at thewealthylife.com. As always, please seek independent professional advice before taking action. We are here to provide information to help you learn and ask the right questions to make smart decisions so you can live the wealthy life.